Good evening, everybody. My name is Johnny Scavidi. I'm the Director for Community Outreach and Alumni Engagement here at Dwight at Yale, and it's my very delightful privilege to welcome you here to our space. We are delighted to partner with the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance on this event. Just a couple of notes, because some of you may not have been in this space before. I wanted to let you know that Dwight at Yale itself is a nonprofit organization. We are financially independent of the university, but we are housed in this center of Old Campus. Our mission is to nurture and inspire students as leaders of social change and to advance justice and service in New Haven and around the world. It's an incredibly broad mission that allows us to collaborate on countless things, which we're very happy to do. To talk to any of us later, I wanted to introduce Serena Lee, who is our co-coordinator of the Student Executive Committee. She's here at this event, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point her out. David Wilkins from our staff is here as well. And I wanted to encourage everybody to sign in on the sign-in sheets on the table at that end of the room. Please indicate if you're interested in signing up for news from Yana or from Dwight Hall, or both, hopefully. And enjoy refreshments through the evening. Bathrooms are in the lobby over there. You can exit through the doors over there. And I think that's all the public service now. So I'm going to hand it over to John Woyke, and we're just delighted to collaborate again with Yana. It's a key partner of ours. And welcome.
Welcome you as well. I'm relatively inexperienced co-chair of the New England chapter of Yana. And I think I'll just mention what Yana is. It stands for Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance. And it is a shared interest group, as Yale calls it. But we are also a separately incorporated 501c3 charity. Their own budget and not under the auspices of Yale itself. So I also encourage you to sign in if you have it. We have about 600 members, I believe, in the and 5,000 overall, and we're constantly looking for more alumni to join us. So if you will, we have a nice website and you can get more information on that. So without further ado, I guess I will now introduce Ron, and he will present that panel.
En dong kitu chielo wa Kenya wa kidega dida ma ka ngweja wera wala tema kar mada wane atuno kama la tema tiye cha madong lwenyo tum da we da nen kama luguru tiye da no luguru wa dong pe reti malet la tiana ni no tila tamo la tino twi pian chugu to wen ti le ke kam rachaj be tiye ni dong penyo ru dong wa gwara don senta kalma don senta nene dong to ma kwa do bunen pier buruma ya ki goya to ga tar dong bardamente mon pagamente ke swia te kala we me gala de kamare inde wara de kela kamaleng dak futo dak ne ga kamaleng
po ne pe yot pian a cher ma la ten a du ma ti la diet
an gen ma timo na ma siel ka chu ka gu pinya foi lo ba piano gwara iberna ken ma du ke gang po ber yot twal babana mo nyala an santa bene ula cho ma ti ke mo beru ke ra mo nyal ke ni bono kwer tek dong nyang ni anda beru la ti nya mo du ke lum o kwer walo tian wen pian ne en wen lu tian ma dong ti chalo chian ki body pian dano ger gi ngeni ken ma wan ber lum ka chan wan ber ka ne ko dan ma pol ti no ki taw ni chian ti wiwa
For a brain that is already affected by trauma, that brain cannot comprehend the daily stressors. The daily stressors which actually just make it to explode. Now, as they move back to their own communities, that is not the same. You have to fend for yourself. If you're a child mother, you've returned with 2 or 3 children from LRA captivity, you have to make sure they eat. You've missed out on education. you are not being received because of the stigma and the fear that even your own family members have, that maybe you've killed so many people while in captivity and you can easily kill anyone anytime. In this post-war era, counseling services now is very, very important to our communities.
Okay, again, I'm LaRon Nelson. I am the Associate Dean for Global Health and Equity at the Yale School of Nursing, also the Independent Foundation Professor and Associate Professor of Nursing. My background is in global health, HIV and AIDS. Much of that work is done in West Africa, Ghana, and Nigeria, as well as Southern Ontario, Canada, which is it's not Africa, but there are the majority of African descendant people who live in Canada actually live in Southern Ontario, and most of those people live in the city of Toronto. We didn't thank Joellen very well. I want to at least start off by saying thank you. Joellen had a major hand, almost single hand, in organizing the speakers for tonight. So Joellen, I want to acknowledge you and thank you for what you did to get us all together.
My pleasure. Actually, we're excited about this.
So we wanted to start tonight off with the video to ground our discussion, to sort of orient the discussion of the presenter, but to have you start thinking about really what it means to provide healthcare services in a new way, what would a new way possibly look like. And so part of the thing that you can think about is the environmental conditions, what you saw, the idea that part of how we say a new way of delivering services is about structures, how the services are actually structured, and thinking about ways to have systems that can be strong, but that can also be nimble, right? Thinking perhaps of, you may think of hospital sites, healthcare sites, at a place where people are going to the ultimate destination, but would it make sense to have sites that are located along the way that people are highway roads, that the ability to access care is not if you survive the journey, but think about what you have to have on that journey. I think about a pastor, and she's a pastor, in Oakland, California. So in California, you have earthquakes sometimes. And she talked about the idea of the buildings in California as these structures, these sort of elaborate, grand structures that people invest a lot of money in, but that live on an earth that moves, that is alive. And what has happened to those structures historically when they were not built for an earth that was alive, that was moving? The structures don't move, so then they crack and they crumble. They fail to serve their need. And so I think when we think about what is the new way of delivering health services, we have to think about what is happening in the world and that people are in flux, things are happening in these places. And how do our healthcare systems serve or fail to serve people that are not sort of placed in one environment for a long period of time? That's different. We're not always oriented to thinking in that way. In addition to sort of physical structure, I think we have to think also about social structure, right? Think about the status of women around the world. Think about patriarchy as a structure and what that does to disadvantaged women, women and children, women and girls who are moving through in these movements of folks that are displaced, but the outcomes between men and women are not the same. Women, by and large, will suffer worse outcomes in those situations. And so thinking about how can our healthcare services deliver in a way that actually mitigates the strategies we see among women. If you haven't seen it, there's a debate right now happening at University of Pennsylvania. I don't remember his name, but a former one of the deans of the medical school said that there is no place for social justice in medical education. Why are we teaching these students these things? They should be teaching very technical skills and not worry about these other things that are going on. I think it came up a debate around gun violence. So there were physicians in the emergency department who said we have to think about these social factors that are impacting why these people are coming in to see us. So the argument was that that's we shouldn't worry about that. That's what that's to worry about. But if we think about the work happening around the world, particularly in Africa, we have to, I think, there's a role to pay attention to these social factors that are impacting how people come to be in these situations. And so We're very fortunate to have 3 guests here tonight who will talk a bit about this. We'll start with Meghan Gallagher, followed by Miriam Gobel, and then we'll finish off our presentations by Nick Hirsch. I may have some questions for the panel, and then we'll open up to questions from you so that it's really tonight we're having a discussion between scholars, folks who are thinking about the work, and folks who are also doing the work right now. So I'll turn it over to Meghan.
Video. I'm nervous. I'll start with an introduction while we see what we can do with AV. My name is Meghan Gallagher, as I said before. I am a research advisor on our Emergency Health and Nutrition team. And I'm going to give you a very broad overview of the work that SAVE does in humanitarian emergencies. I know the focus was Sub-Saharan Africa, and I'll speak a lot about Sub-Saharan Africa, but I may bring in some of our other work in other places as well, just to provide greater context. So I'm just going to start quickly with a really short video about stopping the war on children, which is a campaign that we're working on right now at Save the Children to really bring attention to the fact that so many children across the world are affected by war, and that the wars really have been sustained and prolonged in a lot of places, and they take different forms, but a lot of the root causes and a lot of the health problems are the same throughout.
Right this second, in war zones across the world, children are living through unspeakable horrors with devastating and life-changing consequences. Children like those we know and love. Bombed, shot, starved, raped. In their homes, in the street, and in their schools. They are left with no escape from violence, from the war on children. 100 years ago, Eglantine Jebb founded Save the Children because she saw that every war is a war against children. And a century later, the world is still failing to protect its most vulnerable from horrors they did nothing to create. But we can stop this war on children, and we must. Every one of us, from citizens and community leaders to military commanders and heads of state, must respect that children should always be off limits in war. Those who wage war must always uphold internationally agreed rules and standards. Those who deliberately attack children or violate their rights must be brought to justice. And children must have practical help to stay safe or recover when harmed. We need your help now as urgently as ever. Join our campaign. Use your voice. Make yourself heard. There isn't a moment to lose. Help stop the war on children. And let's give every child the future they deserve.
I'm just going to talk a little bit about what Save the Children does. There is a lot of text on this slide. I'll just hit the highlights. So Save the Children, as the name suggests, works globally to save the lives of children. But in addition to saving lives, it's also critically important to ensure that rights and dignity are restored or continued for children and their families, so that all children can reach their full potential. We work directly with beneficiaries to ensure that we're meeting the most critical needs. And so that means not just providing services, but also really working with kids and families to figure out what some of the most critical needs are. And I think a lot of times we've found when we don't do this, when we don't actively engage communities, we actually make a lot of mistakes. And one of the things that we've been doodling a lot on lately, some of our work in Syria in Jordan with Syrian refugees, we were providing a lot of services to women and a lot of services to children. And kids were getting healthier, families had cash, we were using cash programs, and it really felt like a lot of our indicators looked good and health seemed good. And then over time, things kind of stalled, and we couldn't figure out why. And we got some people together, did some kind of informal focus group discussions, and found that we were completely missing men. And so this whole group of Syrian men who had been educated in Syria, had been professionals in Syria, were suddenly in a new country. They weren't able to use any of the skills that they had. They weren't able to identify as being particularly productive within their families. They couldn't support their families, and culturally that was very important to their identity, and it was important to their family's identity. And women and kids told us that though they appreciated the health services and the cash programs and all of the different skills building for moms, they really missed having the men in their families feel like they were supporting a family and they were being productive. And so, we stopped, we thought of it, and we pivoted and made our cash services more applicable to men, figured out ways that both women and men could use their skills to provide services within their refugee communities in Jordan. And so I think working directly with people and learning what they need is critically important to our work and critically important to how we operate in humanitarian emergencies. SAVE is a massive organization. We have 25,000 staff across the world. Because we're so big, we are able to work in a lot of different places, and we're able to provide a broad variety of services. And I'm going to be talking about this a lot, but that's really helpful because it allows us to link services, and it allows us to meet very specific needs of individual children, individual adults, and individual families. And kind of our three main buckets of the work that we do is that we respond to humanitarian emergencies. So those are wars and natural disasters. We also work to deliver innovative programs in development settings. And I think the juxtaposition of these two areas is really important because we're finding, and I don't know if people heard of this term, but there's a lot of talk these days about the humanitarian development nexus. And it's that area where the humanitarian space and the development space meets. And I think geopolitically, we're seeing wars are lasting longer. We have a lot of situations where most of the time it feels like a development setting. Eastern Congo is a great example. And then suddenly there's an increase in conflict and it goes very quickly back to being an emergency and then segues back to being in development. And so how can we use these two areas of our work to make that transition easier and a little bit more straightforward, because the actors are very different, the challenges can be very different, and so we're really at SAVE trying to use our strength in both of those areas to really meet that nexus. And then finally, our last bucket of work is advocacy. So making sure that the rights of children and families are advocated for at multiple levels globally. Next slide, please. So this just shows where we work. So we work in about 120 countries. Our structure is very elaborate. I won't bore you too much with the details, but we have member offices which do a lot of the fundraising, and then we have one entity that delivers our country program model. So we're working in lots of different places. I know the focus of this is Sub-Saharan Africa. We work in well over 20 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, and that's expanding quite a bit. We're growing programs, especially in some of our West African countries. So Guinea and Sierra Leone are recent kind of refocused places. Next slide, please. Humanitarian response, let's move back. We have, let's see, there's two. I think there's one in Tunisia, and then the other one is in Oman. And so our ambition for 2030 is that children survive, learn, and are protected. And I'm just going to walk through each of these with a short case study. I'm not sure if you can read it, So I will just quickly read it for you. And I'm going to do one case study for each of those ambitions. So the first is to survive. So no child dies from preventable causes before their 5th birthday. And in this one particular case study, there was a baby and their mother who arrived in a camp in Uganda after fleeing their home in South Sudan, where the mother's husband was killed. When they arrived at the camp, the baby was very sick. He was brought to SAVE's emergency health team and was diagnosed with malaria. SAVE provided him with immediate treatment and gave him routine childhood vaccinations to protect him from other illnesses. Today he's healthy and his mother is hopeful for the future. Next slide. So the second priority is to learn. So all children learn from basic quality education. So when Abida was 13, she was forced to marry a man more than twice her age. She spent her days looking after her 2 small children, collecting water, cleaning, and preparing food for her family. But her life transformed when she was able to enroll in our Literacy Boost program, which helps children who have dropped out of school get back on track. Today she's learning to read and write, as well as learning math and other basic life skills, and she also is hopeful for her future. These are our fundraising case studies, so that's why they keep talking about. They're using the same terminology again and again. But I think one of the things that we're really proud of in our education work, especially in humanitarian settings, oftentimes education is not linear, and so we're able to meet kids and adults who have dropped out of the formal education system, either rejoin the formal education system, join participate in education that happens sort of temporarily until systems improve, or enter into more informal education or skills-based trades. And then finally, we want to ensure that violence against children is no longer tolerated. And in this case study, Therese, age 14, witnessed the death of her older brother, her aunt, and 2 of her cousins when their home was attacked by rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo. After the attack, Therese went back to school but was unable to concentrate in her classes because of the trauma she experienced. Our child protection team recognized that Therese needed care, and she was enrolled in our rehabilitation program, where she received counseling and psychosocial support. Therese is doing much better now. She goes to school every day, is enjoying her classes, and hopes to become a teacher in the future. And I think all of these ambitions are really important, but I think that the neatest thing about the 3 ambitions is that because we have these 3 ambitions, we're able to link them. And so we're able to meet kids and families where they are and where they come in. So if somebody comes in because they want to take classes that are being offered by Save the Children, we can link them to nutrition services, we can link them to maternal care services, we can link them to contraceptive services. We have a broad variety of health services that we're providing, and because of this network, we're really easily able to integrate all of this work into a holistic model. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about our emergency response. And we respond to emergencies across all phases of an emergency. So that's everywhere from an acute emergency, within 72 hours of a natural disaster or of the beginning of a conflict, to a protracted emergency, which is what I was talking about earlier, where things are in somewhat of a transitional phase. It's unclear whether they're going to move forward in development or move back into more of an acute crisis, and then as well as moving into a recovery phase, where you're kind of out of the conflict, but there's still damaged infrastructure and certain whole generations potentially of people who haven't received formal education, etc. We partner with local organizations, which I mentioned earlier, which gives us a lot of leeway in accessing communities that we wouldn't necessarily be able to access as an international NGO, and also being able to more easily understand what certain barriers or facilitators to providing care might be. Some of the things that we do in humanitarian settings, Save the Children has a model of child-friendly spaces, which we employ oftentimes in acute emergencies These are spaces where children can come, they can be cared for, they can play, they can learn. Oftentimes they're basis for reunification, so if kids have been separated from their families, they're able to come to child-friendly spaces and reunify there. We have done child-friendly spaces all over the world, including the United States. So we had them in Houston after the hurricane, and they're something that, again, is a really great way for us to kind of quickly assess needs of kids and of families. We also offer a wide variety of healthcare, psychosocial support, education services, and cash grants. And cash grants are I guess they're not that new, but they're something that people are trying and testing, and we are really working to figure out the efficacy of cash grants. Is it useful to give people cash, and will they use that cash or those vouchers to access healthcare services or access psychosocial support or education services? Next slide, please. So just to conclude, I'm going to talk about two things that we do in emergencies that I think have been facilitators in improving our response and facilitators in linking our services. So one of the things that we developed in the last 5 years is our emergency health unit. And this is a team of health professionals, so everything from doctors, nurses, midwives, logisticians, water and sanitation specialists who are consistently together on a team and are deployed in acute emergencies. So thinking about that really early phase where everything is a bit chaotic. And they go to countries, and we have two kind of divisions to that team. There's the primary health response teams, and they're doing kind of that immediate life-saving work. So quickly vaccinating people, setting up emergency health centers to treat any sort of condition that maybe was caused by the onset of war or natural disaster, making sure that water is clean, there are water services available, that there's not cross-contamination happening. We also have inpatient response teams who are doing much diseases in situations where there may be more advanced medical needs, providing surgery, setting up operating theaters, and that sort of work. The emergency health unit has allowed us to be so much more nimble in an acute response because we are able to get services up nearly right away. It's not always perfect, but I think it's really allowed us to provide a lot of services, and a lot of services that are not necessarily traditionally thought of as life-saving, but we have found to be exceptionally useful and cost-effective in emergencies. And that takes you to the next slide. And so I want to talk about a piece of work that I work on quite closely, and I think is also something that we've really found to be effective. So oftentimes in an emergency, we talk about all the things that I just talked about when I was talking about the emergency health unit: water and shelter and sanitation and food. And we often forget that there are a lot of women of reproductive age who are pregnant, who need access to services, and newborns who need access to services. And we really found that though it doesn't feel as direct, the simple provision of contraception to women in emergencies, acute protracted recovery, has massively helped in spacing children, has massively helped families who want to avoid being pregnant in the middle of a crisis have their fertility desires met, and it has become really systematic in all of our responses and has led to much improved maternal and newborn health outcomes. Next slide. So you can visit our website. We are on all sorts of social media. I realized that was a very broad overview, and so I'd be happy to talk more about specific areas of our work during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Dean LaRon Nelson, for having me today. I'm glad to be here with you today. I'm going to be covering the more sort of overarching political global issues as it pertains to humanitarian context, with a specific approach looking at adolescent girls and young women, which my colleague Meghan was talking about, and also looking at the importance of reproductive health service providers, while providing some recommendations of good practices that have worked around the world. So I would like to start, next slide please. I would like to start with a quote by the WHO Deputy Director for Emergency Preparedness and Response, Peter Salama, who said, "The countries most greatly affected aren't necessarily the poorest, but the ones with the weakest health systems, particularly in fragile and in conflict zones." And it is very important to look at the prioritization of universal health care in emergency settings. If we're looking at some of the data across the world, 20 of the most violent crises in the world are at the origin of more than 80% of displacement and humanitarian needs. And in countries gripped by prolonged conflict, with healthcare systems further weakened by armed conflict, resources are unavailable to deal with even the most preventable diseases. And many service providers are faced with decimated facilities. Armed groups, they also block services, access to patients, such as in the Ebola case, which became a real epidemic in 2018. While outbreaks of disease are a medical concern, it's important to look at the larger structural and political issues that allow them to thrive and occur overarchingly. The combination of weak systems, flaws in prevention efforts, ineffective response capabilities, ongoing conflict make healthcare a great source of concern for humanitarian workers. It's important to also look at the 2030 Agenda and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which set a framework for global sustainable development and is particularly pertinent in conflict settings. And also more investment is needed in primary health care. It's been 40 years since the Alma-Ata Declaration on Universal Health Care, and Sub-Saharan Africa has done very little to improve the quality of its health care, productivity, and life expectancy. And African governments really need to demonstrate the political need for universal health care. And as long as there are communities in Africa that do not have access to health care, these will be a risk of infectious diseases. There are some positive examples, however, such as the case of Rwanda, where 96% of Rwandans now have health insurance, and the government pays premiums for about 60% of the population. So when there's a will, there is a way. Next. It's also important, as my colleague Meghan was saying, to address the sexual and reproductive health needs of adolescent girls and young women, and women in general, in humanitarian settings. According to the United Nations Population Fund, about 26 million women and adolescent girls of childbearing age need humanitarian assistance around the world today. Of the 830 women and adolescent girls who die every day from causes related to pregnancy and childbirth, 507 die in countries that are considered fragile. In developing countries, 15 million adolescent girls aged 15 to 19 gave birth in 2015. 13 million lacked access to contraceptives. So that just really puts the perspective. In disaster and conflict, adolescent girls experience increased exposure to coerced sex, early and forced marriage, and childbearing, increasing risk take. Also, many girls are increasing their risk because they also have to play in family circles specific gender roles, and they have very little access to youth-friendly sexual and reproductive health services and education. And given the lack of opportunities, many girls and young women unfortunately need to resort to survival sex to meet the basic needs of healthcare and food. Also, the risk of pregnancy-related death is twice as high for girls aged 15 to 19, and 5 times higher for girls 10 to 14, compared to women in their 20s. And also, adolescent girls are more at risk of unsafe abortions. Unfortunately, adolescents are underserved in humanitarian programming, both acute and protracted, and crisis situations exacerbate the gender inequalities and their vulnerabilities. So, what could be some of the effective interventions for adolescent girls in humanitarian settings? It is very important to start planning and programming early on within a crisis. Service providers should be audited before disasters strike to have coordination mechanisms in place for timely interventions when they do occur. Flexible, culturally sensitive, innovative, multi-sectoral, and integrated interventions are important, and an integrated approach should address HIV/AIDS, maternal health, family planning, gender-based violence, as well as certain sexuality-related issues. And also comprehensive services should be youth-friendly and provided by qualified health professionals. The establishment of safe spaces using culturally friendly strategies in provision of psychosocial support, outreach campaigns into the camps, reproductive health camps for young people, mobile teams and clinics, as well as working with boys and men has turned out to be extremely effective. It's important also for young people to have hope when they're in the camps, for them to feel useful, to teach them vocational skills. It really represents also an entry point into sexual and reproductive health education and psychosocial support for survivors. And to give young people the opportunities to participate in humanitarian activities, to empower them, and for them to see themselves as agents of change and not as victims. The importance of monitoring and evaluation and data collection cannot be overestimated. And adolescent sexual and reproductive health should be mainstreamed in planning for humanitarian emergencies. And of course, there's always a need for increased funding by international community to really address the sexual and reproductive health needs of women and girls in fragile and humanitarian settings. Also, it's important to, in the context of reproductive health, to prioritize the role of midwives. There's a crying global shortage of doctors and midwives in developing countries, and especially in conflict settings, emergency settings. And now there's a global momentum towards increasing midwifery numbers, and in some contexts, introducing midwives as a defined sector in health interventions. It's important to work on coordination between midwifery associations, ministries of health, UN agencies, and to get that support so that midwives can really act when they're needed in disaster and conflict situations. There is the Interagency Working Group for Reproductive Health, which is also a consortium that's a very important player to assist coordination with humanitarian actors and to provide technical guidance on reproductive health. And they have a minimum initial service package, which is really a set of life-saving activities that form the starting point of holistic reproductive health service provision in crisis situations. And therefore, humanitarian actors, policymakers, and donors are strongly encouraged to become more aware and responsible for implementing this critical tool. Data gaps are huge, and implementation research is needed to address the evidence gap concerning the different and effective delivery of healthcare in crisis settings, and in order to strengthen collaboration and referral pathways. Shared data could help improve coordination among the different stakeholders. Data can help guide quantitative research and interpret qualitative findings. There's need for stronger scientific evidence needed to inform health intervention in humanitarian crises. There's a greater use of baseline and routine health data that's needed, and a need for robust research methods and tools, as well as the testing of different protocols and standards. Research is always needed to develop, test, and validate existing and new assessment methods. And research is also needed on the cost effectiveness of humanitarian health intervention and the burden of disease within and across health issues. And it's important to cost key interventions as part of emergency preparedness and to establish financial benchmarks. So what would be some of the new opportunities, next slide please, for collaboration. It's important to pool insights, skills, and resources. Some of these could be the building of alliances across sectors. Humanitarian and health sectors need to work more synergistically in light of TB, Ebola, and measles outbreaks, and HIV/AIDS, and in meeting the sexual and reproductive health needs of women and girls, especially in cases of rape, as weapons of war. Maintaining an ongoing iterative process across a range of professionals and intellectual communities, including health experts, policymakers, practitioners, researchers, and academics, and affected people and governments themselves. There needs to be more conversation and the building of alliances. And also, it requires the openness to other actors and other ways of working. There's too much working in silos across the humanitarian, the health, the education, and that is a waste of time and resources. Local and international organizations can complement each other. Academia brings critical thinking and measurability, while the private sector has a unique ability to get economies up and running and to support communities in developing businesses, capacities, and skills. It's important to move away from business as usual in humanitarian settings. It's very important before a crisis to already plan and prepare, to working with communities, empower the communities for disaster reduction, in building partnerships, capacity, and supply systems. And it's important to support local actors as crucial first responders. Also, it's important to building the communities and giving them opportunities within the camps themselves, especially in proactive conflicts, supporting self-reliance. Meghan was talking about cash transfers. Also, they have replaced physical aid delivery in some areas, while microcredits have opened paths to independent economic activity. It's very important to provide youth with vocational training, empower them through education, and to provide also protective measures to cover the most vulnerable groups. For example, such as training men from communities to better protect the women and girls from their own communities against external violence, especially sexual violence. Social safety nets often do not exist for communities to rely on in case of catastrophes. There's a need to work with national and donor governments for emergency preparedness at that level as well. And new investments for sustainability, for more targeted and sustainable investment in people, skills, and revenues for communities. It's also important to capitalize on digital opportunities. This is something that's a very hot topic right now, because it allows for improved analytics and supply chains, in better data collection. It also allows for communities who have mobile technology to actually use mobile technology to inform about what's happening in their communities, to collect data, and to be also stakeholders in the process of recovery within their communities after trauma. And last but not least, addressing trauma linked to violence, rape, and other atrocities of conflict is key. As we saw from the first video, trauma, mental health needs absolutely need to be prioritized in emergencies. And my esteemed colleague, Mick Hirsch, will be talking more about this in his own program. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, good evening. Again, my name is Mick Hirsch, and I'm the Executive Director of Thrive Blue. Thank you for bearing with us as we sorted out that technical difficulty with the video that we tried to play at the beginning of this program, but we got it going, so I hope you were able to delighted that I'm a member. I think I'm an executive member. I'm not sure what exactly that means, but it sounds good. So I'm the executive member of the New England chapter of YANA. And all of you are invited to join YANA, by the way. So I hope that would be clear. All right, so the title of my program is More Than Surviving, a New Model for Hope and Healing in Post-Conflict Communities. Okay, from Survivor to Thriver. So that's one of our most popular taglines. And basically what we're trying to imply with that is that there's a progression, there's a movement from surviving a conflict, a war, and then to actually regroup and reclaim yourself, your identity, your location in life and in your community, so that you can thrive. And there's a great quote there by Maya Angelou, where her mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive. So let's unpack these two terms. What does it mean to survive? First, the direct etymological Latin is to outlive, to live beyond. But later, it came to really mean to continue in existence after the death of another. I find that a little unsettling. It feels to me like it's like you're almost an heir of someone else's death, which is literally what it meant in medieval France, to be an heir of someone else's death. Have that relation, that close relation, inherit a close relationship with death. And this is a very powerful drawing, I think, by Kathy Polvis, who is one of the, in my opinion, one of the great artists and documentarians, really, of trauma, from just around the turn of the 19th century. The name of this piece is The Survivors. And you'll notice that these are people who have survived, but she's capturing the fact that just because you survived, you may still have a long way to go. And to thrive. To thrive literally meant to grasp oneself in the old Nordic and Middle English. To grasp oneself. So I kind of extrapolated on that definition, and so I have two definitions myself that I like to use. One is to claim one's own potentiality, to grasp your own potential in life. The second is to embrace the life, humanity, and goodness that is your truth. Trauma destroys those things. A person who has experienced severe trauma has lost their potential, or at least they think they've lost it. They've almost lost their life, or they've lost the symbolic quality of their life, where they feel as though they're literally a member of the Walking Dead. And they've lost their humanity, their sense of goodness. They've been humiliated. They've been through so much that they've really lost the truth that is them. And I love this photograph by Anna Gaskell. It reminds me of that scene in Forrest Gump when the young Jenny and young Forrest, Jenny is running away from her father, who is a drunk and physically and sexually abuses her. She's running away through the cornfields. And she says, Forrest, and she drops down to her knees and says, Forrest, come pray with me. And she says, God, make me a bird so I can fly far, far, far away. She wants to thrive. Okay, so survival is precarious. You're always kind of teetering. It's the threshold between life, death, and a life worse than death, which unfortunately is the sad reality. And it's a wager. It's a wager for all of us in our lives every day. But it's magnified 1,000, 1,000,000 times for someone who's survived serious trauma, because they've survived this. But what about that? And that, and that, and that. But I say all this, but don't want to denigrate or downplay how special it is and how amazing it is to survive, because it really is an amazing feat. And it requires a tremendous amount of strength courage and resilience. My point, and I hope that I get that across, is that even though you're surviving, even though you have these things which have helped you to survive, that doesn't necessarily mean that on the other side of survival in the aftermath, you're able to really make use of some of those tools that you used during the conflict. And this is the Ugandan flag. I show that because there's some tremendous survivors. So I think of trauma in two different ways. Phase one, you got all these horrible things that can happen to you, from war to torture, to maiming, sexual violence, and you've got to face basically these acts. But then there's phase two. So phase one leads right into phase two. Flashbacks, nightmares, scars, depression, anxiety, feeling alone or unwanted, suicidal thoughts. And if that isn't enough, phase two also includes all of this. Loss of opportunities. You miss out on education. You now live in abject poverty. You've been rejected by your family and clan. Think about Santa in that video, who was rejected by her husband, her father, her entire village. And now that you're home, the whole world wants to say one thing to you. Act normal. Act normal. But you don't feel normal. You don't feel normal at all. And I love this image for a symbol of trauma, because you want to act sweet, to others. You want to look pretty on the outside, but inside you're falling apart, and you're on the brink of collapse at any moment. This beautiful royal cape go tumbling down. People. Okay, so this is more now turning into Dwight. So the effects of what we do, we work in both. We work in Uganda, but we work with Ugandans and South Sudanese refugees who have been forcibly displaced into northern Uganda. So Uganda suffered from the Lord's Resistance Army, Joseph Kony. It was a 20-plus-year war. It was a Choli killing a Choli, over 100,000 killed, almost 2 million displaced, 70,000 plus of child abductees. All of these numbers are conservative. No one really knows. I think they're probably significantly higher than that, but we'll go with that because those numbers are terrible as it is. And South Sudan. South Sudan is the newest country. I think probably most of you know that. It was established July 9, 2011, and 2.5 years later, there was war, a major civil war, which is still lasting. And now, today, it's the third largest active refugee crisis in the world. 4.3 million people displaced. As of about, 4 days ago, there were 2,321,343,000 refugees to the number, 842,640 to the number. In Uganda, 63% are children. We, Thrive Gulu, works in a refugee settlement in northern Uganda called Palabek. So we work in the Palabek settlement. When we first started working there in November of last year, there were 25,000 people, refugees in that settlement. Now there's over 50,000. And I should say real quick, one of the things that's really interesting about Uganda that many people don't know is that Uganda has refugee settlements. They don't necessarily use the camp model. So they have refugee settlements, which means that all refugees are given a small parcel of land on which they can set up a dwelling for themselves and grow vegetables and this sort of thing. It's nothing really fancy, but it's something. And that land is integrated fully into the host community. So you've got South Sudanese and Ugandans living side by side. Until I saw it with my own eyes, it's an amazing thing. And it's not perfect, but it's kind of a beautiful thing to see the harmony there. So this is us, and these are our people. So we were founded in 2010 as a women's organization, and had said, one of the things we realized is that it's also important to keep in mind that men are a part of this too. So now we work with about 70% women and 30% men. And that works really well for us. And this is one of my favorite photographs of all time. This is 4 generations of Ugandan women learning how to read. That little baby is just priceless, I think. Looking at that book, that manual, learning how to read. When people ask me, what are the outputs? What are the outcomes of your organization? What have you accomplished? I showed them this picture. This is what we've accomplished. And then these are some of our South Sudanese people. That's World Refugee Day. All right, and then finally, the new model that we've been talking about, all of us here. So the new model that we've come up with, that I came up with about a year ago, was that I call 5 to Thrive, the 5 to Thrive model. It involves mental health, financial health, social health, spiritual health, and family health. So it's kind of a nexus of all these different things to help one thrive. And all of these components are necessary for someone to thrive. Thrive believes that meaningful existence is more than mere survival. We believe the invisible wounds of psychological trauma deserve healing, and we believe that functionality and productivity can only flourish when an individual and her community are more than surviving. That's basically our credo. Mental health. The WHO said no health without mental health. We really like that. So, and I think that actually gets to the very end of Miriam's talk too. Trauma lingers. And there's one other thing that a lot of people sometimes don't know or forget about, and that's the phenomenon of 2nd and 3rd generation trauma. That's when trauma is passed down to your children. So that if I survived the war, but I have all those things from phase 2, I have flashbacks, I have nightmares, I have depression, I have anxiety, I drink alcohol to numb my pain, I live in poverty, all this is passed on to my kids. And then what happens to that child? That child ends up having a baby at age 14, and then that mental health trauma just continues to cycle and cycle and cycle. So what do? We do individual, family, and group counseling. We don't necessarily follow Western modalities. I probably don't have time to get into that right now, but if you have questions about it, what I mean by not following with it, by questioning Western modalities, I'm happy to explain. But that means things like cognitive behavioral therapy and so on. We do a lot of community awareness where we try to reduce stigma. We do group sessions to explain new things, mental health concepts to people, radio call-ins, mobile clinics to reach some people in hard-to-reach areas, kind of like what LaRon was saying about fluctuating. And this is financial health. So we have a new microfinance model. Uganda is one of the world's 21 lowest income countries. The average monthly household income is less than $150. Even in northern Uganda, that's not much. And you're talking a household income there, and a household size is 4.7 on average. One of the highest youth unemployment rates in Sub-Saharan Africa. And there's also intergenerational poverty. So you've got intergenerational poverty, which means that I'm poor, and so I pass down my poorness to my children, and they pass down their poor to their children. And I've got mental health trauma, and I pass that down to my children, and they pass that on to their children. And so you've got this double thing that's like just overwhelming for so many people. So what do? We try to help them establish village savings and loan associations. And then we do some seed money for income generating activities. I don't know exactly if that's kind of the cash model that you were talking about, but it's probably somewhere or similar to that. This is social health. So we work on group dynamics because people they've had so much conflict. In northern Uganda, you had people's children were abducted and they were killing other people's other So we have some classes that we hold on that. We do a lot of gender equality and gender equity. We do a lot of gender-based violence because it's just rampant, unfortunately. It's one of the sad realities of post-conflict society is that people take out their anger and frustration and trauma on other people. And oftentimes that's women and young girls, but also men too. We teach literacy. I showed you that photograph that I love. And we do some work in schools. We're actually an implementing partner of Save the Children in Uganda. We're the chief program implementing partner for child protection in northern Uganda. We work on, well, I'll get to what we work on in a second. Spiritual health. The importance that there's something greater than yourself. So we're of course non-proselytizing, non-denominational, all that. But we do recognize that spirituality is something that is really important for the people we serve, and that it can be a complementary tool for healing the invisible wounds of trauma. And then this is family health, which I lump things like reproductive health and family planning and this sort of thing. Some of these statistics are just incredible and heartbreaking. Uganda has the world's youngest population of all the countries in the world. Uganda has the world's youngest population. 78% of Ugandans are below the age of 30. Almost 50% are between 0 and 14. Only 2.04% are over 65. But that's just the beginning. Teenage pregnancy in the north is 34%. 34% of teenage women have a baby, at least one. 23% of girls drop out of school because of that. And one in 4 have already given birth or are pregnant by the age of 15. And then my very last thing before LaRon kicks me out, child marriage is 59%. 59%. These are actually Save the Children statistics, thank you. Child marriage is 59%, and 35% of girls drop out because of that. And that's all. That's us. Please go to our website. You can watch the full-length video on YouTube. You can email me if you have any other questions, and we're on social media. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. That was a very nice way to actually tie it all together and prepare for this discussion. So I did want to start by asking, I guess this is start off with Rick was taking us this idea about striving, surviving and thriving. So it occurs to me that the ability to survive and thrive in displaced settings is not just determined by intervening during the incident, but preparing people for what may come, if that were to come, right? Build institutionalizing resilience in communities. And one thing that all of you talked about, they called it financial health. Mary, you referenced cash grants and social making. So thinking about, can you tell us any promising models that you know about that utilize sort of cash grants, cash for building, not necessarily cash simply for consuming to buy things, but cash for building infrastructure within communities, either that help them withstand some of the displacement that may occur, but I also want to think about people having to repatriate back to communities where there's been disconnection, and anywhere that's been able to help them sort of plan and prepare financially for returning.
Well, I'd say it's always very difficult to plan and prepare people for what life is going to be like post-conflict. I'm not sure that there's any model I'm aware of that has been very successful at really kind of bridging that gap to make it a smoother transition. That I think you're right on that's an area of need. I used to work in refugee resettlement in the United States, and in theory, the IOM, the International Office of Migration, gives classes to all refugees, States on what it's going to be like when you come to America. You would never think that anyone has ever gotten even a second class because there's, in theory that's a model that they use, but it's an unproductive model, at least from my experience. Once there's a little bit of time and you actually have a group of people, then this is what Thrive does. When we institute seed money for income generating activities, we've established what we call an empowerment group. So we have this group, and it's usually somewhere between 20 to 40 people. And then we provide them with some seed money. And we carefully oversee that. And the seed money is actually a collective. So it's not going to an individual, it's going to a collective. So the people decide, this is part of the democratic, I guess I didn't mention it, but the democratic kind of process that we teach them, that we help teach them. So they decide, okay, well, we want to raise goats as a village, as a community. So they buy goats. And then over time, each one of them has earned from this collective enterprise enough little money so that if they don't want to sell goats anymore, that they want to grow tomatoes, they can go grow tomatoes, or they can do both. So that's kind of how we look at it. I don't know if that exactly addresses the point you're trying to make, but it's hard.
In my presentation, I was talking about cash transfers, but I think that one thing I wanted to put the focus on is also the importance of vocational training. I think that to remove people away from a situation of helplessness, of feeling sorry for themselves, and also to break the intergenerational cycles of poverty. Providing young people, especially in contexts like Uganda, where you have such a high percentage of young people, providing them with education and especially vocational training, and also connecting with specific jobs, even if it would be just to work in nearby factories or businesses, or even within the camps themselves, selling something. I think that giving that opportunity to young people, it really allows them to elevate their possibilities, and getting the education in conjunction also allows for them to make money, but also to educate their children, and that way to break those cycles of intergenerational poverty and lack of education. So I think that there's also a very qualitative side to that, that it's important to have cash transfers, and some of them have been tested and with mitigated results. And but I think that giving people the opportunity to really lift themselves out of their poverty and out of their situation is the best way, like with those fields we were talking about. It gives them the hope, it gives them the pride, and it gives them the sense of dignity that they have lost in conflict.
Thank you.
So I don't mean to sound cynical. I think we need to know a lot more about cash. I think cash plays a really important role at a time where people maybe just need to procure services for themselves in I think of maybe like an acute setting, but I think cash is a very popular topic right now, but there haven't been very many studies that look at whether or not cash leads to any sort of sustained change. I think there's hope that it does, and I think some of these models for health insurance maybe are working a little bit more clearly than cash, but I think cash serves a really important role in emergencies, or could, but I think we don't really know we don't know as much about cash as we should, and I want to see more rigorous studies being done around cash, because we're seeing it more and more, and it's taking lots of forms, and I think we could learn a lot from it, and I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I just think we need to know more. And then on vocational training, I agree with you, I think it's really important. I have seen over the years a lot of very poorly thought out vocational training setups where people are being taught to sew, and it turns out there's not really much market for home sewn goods. And so I think I agree with you. really deliberate training programs are a great way to improve microeconomies and really give people a sense of skill and a sense of worth and productivity. But I also think that a lot of times it's not done in tandem with a community or with a true sense of what's economically viable and feasible. And so people end up with a skill that's actually not generating much money. And sometimes they personally invested to buy fabric or to buy whatever inputs they need, and don't always end up in a better place. So I think it's important. I just think it needs to be thought of within a holistic economy.
Thank you.
And then there's the microcredits as well, giving microcredits to, for example, to vulnerable women to build their own business or even at a very small scale has engendered great results as well.
So microcredit is the extension of a small amount of credit line to someone?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and basically to build a business so as an extension, for example, of those vocational trainings, to give them the skills to be able to manage the money, you give them the money so that they can build something and then pay back as their businesses grow. And data has shown that women who have engaged in microcredit are the best to pay back that money. Actually, it's really been a very successful model across the world, in and out of humanitarian settings.
Thank you. I want to open the floor to any questions from the audience. Yes, Sam.
I think everyone in this room, I'm sure, especially on this panel, is aware of how humanitarian aid has a very difficult, darker side for the last century, and it's caused a lot of harm in many contexts. And this research, I think, it's valuable always to question the credibility of trends, and trends are always trends are a few trends that show that there's an inverse relationship between aid and humanitarian intervention and growth within a country. And this is linked to a lot of saviorism complexes, this is linked to a lot of undermining the local agency, how governments will take a step back when international organizations come in. You can have a conversation with local stakeholders, but that does not mean they're in control of their own agenda. There's lots of these things that really come up. And so I'd just really like to hear how your work with the departments, how you have, why you feel your work is not this, because I don't believe that any of you doing your work was. So what do you feel like you're doing is not this, because even now there's this trend of that underlying practices?
I would say all work is a little bit of that, if we're being really honest. I mean, I shouldn't speak as myself and not as my organization. I mean, I think it's a very challenging environment, and I think there are a lot of really challenging governments. And so, for me, you provide aid at a time when governments can't provide aid, and the goal, obviously, is to move governments along. But as you said, that is not, if we look globally, that's not happening right now. And I think as a response to that, I feel like we're at a moment where funding is shifting. There's a real desire to focus on resilience. How do you, in the middle of in a fragile setting, move to more resilient systems? And localization. So how do you fund organizations directly? And we were talking about this before we started. How do you fund local organizations directly to do this work? And I don't have a clear answer for you. I wish I did. I wish it was more straightforward. I think it's important to find work that you see outputs that you're satisfied with. And I feel like I am satisfied with our outputs. Do I think that in some ways we are all making governments somewhat reliant on international aid? Absolutely. And so I think we're at a time where there needs to be experiments. What does it look like to fund a local organization? What does it look like to fund a government directly? Does it work? Does it not work? And you test it and you pilot it and you're willing to lose that money. And then if that doesn't work, you pivot and you try something else. I think we have all this technology, we have all this innovation, and I think we have a lot of funding and a lot of funders who want to be innovative. And so I think we're at a point where it would be useful to try things to see if we really can make governments more resilient. And I think it will then involve investing in things that are a lot less linked to outputs that we're comfortable with, like lives saved and children fed and that sort of thing, and much more, what is the capacity of your health staff in a particular country? What is the capacity of your researchers? You know, a lot of, as you were alluding to, a lot of things around data and statistics and that kind of work that's quite frankly a lot less sexy, but I think is really important to making government stronger. And so I appreciate your question. I wish I had a less wishy-washy answer, but I think it's something that we all do need to be thinking about, because I think at the end of the day, we are making an incremental difference, but I also think we are not necessarily changing, even with collaboration, the reliance that a lot of governments have on humanitarian aid.
May I also respond to Sam's question?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm responding exactly to what you were asking, but there were some keywords that were coming out of what you were saying, really, loss of agency, and it's very important, to look over time as the lessons learned. What has worked, what hasn't, and I think that often in the development community there is not enough taking stock of what has worked and what hasn't, and often replicating some of the same mistakes from the past. And we were just having this discussion earlier before this panel about should we continue working with ministries of health, for example, in the context of healthcare, or funding the funds through ministries, or education, or health, or interior, versus really working directly with the communities, with the NGOs, with the community-based organizations, giving them the necessary skills to be able to manage the funding and to actually have impact on the ground with the money that's given to them. And some of the very promising results come from when you give agency to communities, when you build the capacities of communities to really take control over their community. And we can talk at a district level, we don't necessarily need to talk very small communities. Communities can be huge. But at the same time, it is important to keep in mind the political side of things. We live in a very politicized world. You cannot go into a country and just completely circumvent ministries. However, it's important to find how you can find a perfect middle ground, and if you can ever find that, or as good as it gets middle ground, whereby you involve all the different key stakeholders, whether it's the governmental, the civil society, the local, to work together and to maximize the funding that donors are going to give in order to have the highest impact. And this is trial and error. It does take time, and we're learning as we go, from one crisis to another, even outside of crisis situations where there's just extreme poverty. And so it is a very good question to keep on the radar. But it's, I would say, through trial and error, and hopefully, less error and just more success. But clearly, working with communities is something that is now coming across as a model that really works.
Thank you. I'm going to take another question with a lot of hands to get to. Michael.
I've been really intrigued by this conversation as parallel of domestic issues around basic income and vocational training. I'm really interested in what your opinion might be about how domestic service providers could learn from organizations about providing services to inherently transient populations, or sex education to constituencies that might be culturally diverse. I ask because there was recently a statewide challenge around youth homelessness, ages 18 to 25, and one of the learning moments from that was that connecting those people to ongoing services to form stable housing and employment relationships is quite difficult, because they could be in Vancouver today, they could be living in their car in Bridgeport tomorrow, or they could be up in Massachusetts the next week.
One of the things that it makes me think about is what Miriam talked about in terms of data sharing. So I think a challenge right now domestically is that our systems are not built for collaboration or for competition. And so it doesn't allow, for example, the ability to be able to exchange information about somebody. So say the person is homeless but they have a phone, maybe they have data, and maybe they're in care in New Haven, and then they're in, I don't know, Kentucky tomorrow. But there's no way for them to access care or that data because that data is stuck in a place in New Haven. And so I'm part of a company that is looking at models of actually data sharing, so creating a way for anybody who signs on, any health system who signs on, to be able to share information about clients. So the concern is not that this is my client and I own this data and I can't share it with you because somehow it gives you a particular advantage over me. It's about how can we work together to provide care for this person. So a place can own a record, a place Miami can own a record, but if you move to Kentucky, for example, as an agency in Kentucky as part of the network, you can still be able to see the information and provide services to this client. Without having to go through everything all over again, telling everybody for the 10th time how they on the radio, whatever it might have been. So I think investment in those types of models might be able to help serve folks who want to find a location. And if, when people move because of displacement or for whatever reason, they might still be able to access, have some continuity in their care.
There's some good lessons to be learned, for example, from HIV testing and counseling, globally. It's whereby, in order to avoid for people to get tested in different sites with different results, because it also impacts the care that they're receiving. I think there are some good models out there in terms of how to address people who are seeking services in different places. I think especially when I'm talking about my own experience in terms of HIV treatment, for example, and for people to be able to access antiretroviral treatment in different areas. So I think it's like LaRon was saying about the interconnectedness of the services, and we have that digital technology. It's a question of the different service providers across the country. I don't have experience from the U.S. Mine is more from developing countries, but still, I think it all applies. I think that the harnessing that digital technology that we have can overcome many of these problems for transient communities. I think that there's some lessons also to be learned from Roma communities in the European context. So I think that there are some very good information around that. I think it's just a matter of maybe consolidating that better into studying that more, and to provide very thorough recommendations as to how that would work best.
Ashley?
My question is largely a follow-up to the first question in class. So from your response, one thing that came across was that you understood the importance of government. So in a way, in the long term, you need to have the government in the back. So I understand and I appreciate the answer that you gave. So I just wanted to ask you from the example that you presented in your presentation about Rwanda, that does that in any way have any lessons for us in terms of how a non-profit can work with governments to improve capacity? And that's one question. I have a quick question for Mick. So I really found your right-to-life model really intriguing. So I just have a question based on my experience from India that I know. So the aspects of financial, social, and family health, I see many of the interventions that are very there. The focus areas. The mental health and the spiritual health aspects don't seem to be, mental health obviously now is gaining importance, but spiritual health, I understand and recognize the importance of it. I wanted to ask you, is that not given as much importance in these programs in a lot of countries because of misdirection or not recognizing it, or because there is a lack of people who can come into such settings and provide that intervention? So I want to know your views.
I didn't mention Rwanda, but I'm happy to talk about Rwanda. So
When you mentioned, I'm so sorry.
But I think Rwanda is actually a really interesting outlier and really hard to look at as a model, because if you look at HIV research from Rwanda, the compliance to regimens is remarkably high. If you look at continuation for contraception in Rwanda, it's remarkably high. It always think Rwanda has made a lot of investments. They don't have any natural resources. They've made a lot of investments in their people. That being said, Rwanda runs itself in a very controlled way. And so I think what works in Rwanda doesn't always work in a lot of other places, especially places where there are multiple inputs from multiple communities. But I do think Rwanda has had interesting investment in the private sector and investment by the private sector and a lot of development of technology and a technology class, which has been useful there. I guess just to your other point, I think governments are really important. I also think it's important to note that not all governments are the same. Like I do a lot of work in Yemen, and who the government is in Yemen is a very complicated question. And what that collaboration looks like is a really important question. It can be quite sensitive if you're perceived as aligning with certain government factions. So though I think governments are essential in they're gatekeepers to doing all of our work, I do think it is something that is not uniform and needs to be approached cautiously depending on where one is working.
I have a question. How much of your staff, how much of your staff are locals, citizens of that country, as opposed to?
Almost all our country staff are all local. I mean, every once in a while we have, especially in our emergencies, we'll have like teams of people or maybe Congolese that are responding in Niger because they have those experiences. But in all of our development settings, the staff are from the countries.
Do you want to also respond to that question?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I think it's a great question. I think there's a lot of reasons. There are hundreds of thousands of Christian NGOs that are out there, and many of them get a lot of funding from very clearly identified Christian sources. So when you're talking about a spiritual approach, a non-denominational, a non-faith, a non-creedal, you're non-proselytizing approach where you go into a community and you're not trying to convert them to Christianity, that's very rare. You just don't find that very often, which is too bad because the communities are often so religious. They hold on to that. It's so important. When I worked in Cambodia, their Buddhism was so important to them, and it was such a helpful factor for them. When I work in Uganda, their Christianity is so powerful, it's so important. One of my favorite stories is I also studied at the Harvard program in refugee trauma, and Richard Malika is the director of that. He tells a great story about how he had a client, an old Cambodian woman, who was very, very depressed. She survived the war, very, very depressed. He asked her, well, what makes you feel better? I feel better when I go to the temple. And he said, well, why don't you go to the temple? Because my family won't take me. So he took out his prescription pad and he wrote a prescription. Take grandma to the temple. And she handed it to him, and it looked official, so they started taking her to the temple every day, and she started feeling good. So, there are people doing good things, and Richard Malika actually is a graduate of the Yale Alumni School and did his psychiatric residency at Yale Hospital. Anyway, there's this kind of big gap between organizations that have a very clear faith mission and organizations like ours that don't have any faith mission but have an openness to spirituality. Now, if we were to try to get funding to do what we do in that area, in that particular area, we would never find it. It would be great if we could find it, but I'm not going to be able to find it, that's for sure. The other thing is that I was trained as a pastoral care counselor, and there are very few people who are in pastoral care and counseling who do international work, and that's a shame too, because I think more people who have an understanding and a background in chaplaincy, which is kind of a non-denominational, non-creedal
Yes, Daisy, and then Rebecca.
A question for Marian. You talked about, at one point, thinking about better ways of collaboration between sectors. You mentioned the academic space as like a good source of research and evaluation. The private sector is like stimulating economies. My sense is that the collaboration, where it doesn't exist, is because the incentives are not aligned for them to do so. So I'm wondering how you would maybe help to align some of the incentives for collaboration in order to bring the parties together, especially at the beginning rather than sort of retroactively. And then my question for Mick is just around scale. When people ask you, like, can you take what you're doing and do it somewhere else? You've been around for XYZ amount of time. How many people, like that kind of question, like how you would respond to that?
Great questions. That first one was my backup question, but I don't have to ask it now. So.
It's a tough question. Well, I think that there's many ways to design collaboration between different stakeholders. For example, to create working groups, to create consortia, for example, whereby you would have private sector funding being used to fund research, academic research, to generate better data in terms of a specific situation, so within a given country. Also to work with funders that would fund more academic research into specific subject matter areas, whether it's health, whether it's education, and to really give more value to, or a better sort of, give a bigger spotlight, let's say, to academic research. In my experience, for example, when I used to work at the Global Fund and we wanted to launch a new investment around cash transfers for adolescent girls in 4 Southern African countries. And the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria is one of the biggest funders of HIV/AIDS worldwide beyond USAID. Was to work with different stakeholders, such as academia, with, for example, research institutions in Southern Africa, to understand some of the data that's coming out on cash transfers, some of the trials that are being done. So there are many ways that you can work where you can get these different stakeholders to work together. Clearly, it still needs to be done more in order to and in a more synergistic manner. But it is possible. It's just a matter of getting key players together around a specific issue in a specific context. It could be within the UN. It could be within the context of different funders between the Global Fund, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the World Bank, who would create a program and then get the different stakeholders together. So there's different ways. I fully agree that it is a challenge, but it is feasible.
Just on the academic piece, I think it's really my training is not in any kind of traditional medical training really. So I think it's important that we also think about having dialogues in academia with non-traditional voices. So for 7 years, I taught as an adjunct up in Waterbury art history, and I love art because art teaches me. So when I think about what I need, when I think about my problems, I think about art. When I study philosophy, more than surviving is a Heideggerian fantasy of mine, because I learned from reading Heidegger about how to address these problems. I don't read any data. I don't read any like medical journals or global health journals or anything like that. And not to say that those are bad, but you can't read everything. So I think it's just important to think about, what can I learn from philosophy or literature? Have you read a novel that's written by someone from these places? I mean, like, Like that's you know, there's a great Ugandan novel called Chintu that just came out by a Ugandan woman. Like, you're going to learn about sexual violence in Uganda by reading that. So, you know, so just the non-traditional voices I think are important. As far as scalability, yes, I think you can replicate it. So one of the things that I've done a bit of work on was is comparative study between Cambodia and northern Uganda, because I think there's a lot of commonalities, and since I've worked in those two areas, which are both post-genocidal, they're both you know, a lot of trauma. They're both, you know, it was Khmer killing Khmer, it was Acholi killing Acholi, it was Buddhist killing Buddhist, it was Christian killing Christian. There's just a lot of kind of similarities. So I've done a lot of comparative work, and there's actually there's a relatively new discipline, Asia-Africa study. I don't know, some of you have probably heard of this, but I presented a paper in Dar es Salaam. We were talking about this. I presented a paper a year ago at a conference on Asia-Africa studies, and presented this model as being something that could, you know, conceivably be applied in multiple areas. Well, it's not big enough. I mean, you all are the only people who know about this, and the people in Dar es Salaam. But it's conceivable. You know, it would need to be tested and run through a lot of things. And the other thing, though, is that I really believe in smaller, localized settings. I think that's really powerful. So I would never want it to get to be, you know, global. I wouldn't want the World Health Organization to embrace it and say, you know, let's start using it everywhere. I think that, you know, I think there's something to be said about the local, but I think it is replicable. Thank you.
Thank you. There are a few other questions. Before I do that, Joelle is going to take over moderation for tonight. I have to get it through the airport.
Oh.
So can I just ask us all to thank LaRon so much?
Yeah, absolutely. Safe travel.
Thank you.
I'll come up there. Well, Mick, you're probably better adapted. Is there another question?
I have a question about basically what we touched on, but maybe like you could give us examples of like I wonder if like organizational efficiency is something that has that like takes priority for your things. For example, Save the Children. Although I know that a lot of like funding, for instance, is from donors and like these big institutions, and where like you have people coming to you for help, but it's not like clients. You don't have to like show balance sheets to them, or you don't like how like what are some examples of like organizational efficiency, not only in terms of like the number of people you reach, but also like the kind of services you provide. How have you like tried to improve them? And that goes for both organizations. And the other question is in terms of like learning and like outreach. How do you like, since you have so many like different locations that you work at, like how do people like know that it's an organization that they can go to for help for something? For instance, in some of the programs you mentioned, like psychosocial counseling, like what is like the outreach system that is
So your first part of the question, were you talking kind of also, and I might just start with the term, like accountability and quality of care? That like how do we show to the ultimate beneficiaries that the services that are being provided to them are good?
Yes, but also kind of like could we do it better in terms of like how much money we're spending versus how much it actually is helping?
So like cost effectiveness. Yeah, I've been really interested from a personal standpoint in cost effectiveness. That there's been a lot of attempts to kind of, especially in emergencies, to sort of look at different models and figure out which ones are the most beneficial and also cost effective. Because you're right, I mean, large organizations do take overhead and require a lot of levels of work. So I think we are thinking a lot about cost effectiveness, and a lot of the most tangible cost effectiveness work that we do is from a quality of care standpoint. So I work on a project that works directly with ministries of health. So, I'm able to actually go and meet providers and train them on data use and how they can talk about their data at their health center in a way that makes them figure out where their needs are in services. And so I do feel like we are close enough to ministries of health and close enough to individual providers in that way to do a lot of training and capacity building around provision of services. So, thinking about contraception, how to insert an IUD at a rural health center, how to, use injectables, that sort of thing. I think from an accountability standpoint and from a research standpoint, we're trying more and more to make sure that our research is getting back to the populations that we ask questions of. So, if you go into a focus group discussion with a group of people in a town somewhere, making sure that you loop back to them and say hey, this is what we learned. This is what we learned here. It's funny, we did this in Somalia and we also did it in Niger, and some of your needs were the same. And figuring out ways to do that in a way that resonates with people. But then also looking at what things work better than others. And so effectiveness studies, both from a cost standpoint and then also from a service delivery standpoint. From an outreach perspective, we do all kinds of things. A lot of our medical programs, community health workers are hugely useful. So people who are employed by the Ministry of Health to share messages, they're often overburdened. And then we do a lot of kind of broader things, having health providers do sessions where they talk about different services that they can provide. We do a lot with groups, so adolescents and youth, going and talking to other adolescents and youth, especially kids that are out of school. So figuring out ways to connect with those young people that aren't in a traditional school setting. Radio programs, dramas, it really is, it runs the whole gamut. It's a little harder to do in emergencies, but it's been something that we've really been working on. Especially not just looking at women and girls, but also men and boys, and figuring out how everyone can benefit from messages around a variety of health topics.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. We're a very small organization, so the contrast between Save the Children and Thrive Hulu is very, very big. So we have 26 staff, all Ugandan, and then there's myself and 2 half-time other employees in the United States. So our budget is pretty transparent because it's not very big. We always include we don't call them beneficiaries, we call them thrivers. We always include our thrivers in the discussions about what we're doing, and so I think that they have a pretty good idea. And there's just a good dialogue and constant communication. So there are many of them can name some of our donors back in the United States because we tell them. So because we want them to know, and they want to know, and so they pray for them, and they celebrate, and they dance, and it's awesome.
It's pretty cool. I believe you got a question as well.
Yeah, I was just interested in the whole job creation and self-esteem part of it.
For the work that they produce, and it's usually around food, commodities, or cotton. But whenever you do that, you promote development because you give people the right wage for them to be able to move forward and to lift themselves out of poverty or to have a decent living. So the notion of fair trade should be woven in any kind of micro development program that one establishes, whether in a humanitarian, post-humanitarian context, or even just the international development context. So it is key, yes.
In the environment, we're seeing a lot more war and a lot more natural disasters because of climate change. I mean, wars are caused by scarcity, which is caused by climate change, and natural disasters obviously are exacerbated. We're responding to so many more emergencies than we used to. And I think one of the things, I also work in contraception, and there is starting to be some funding around sort of population growth, but that makes me a bit uneasy. I mean, I think obviously population growth is a part of the conversation around climate change, but I also don't want, you know, our contraception plans to go back to population control, because that is obviously a rights issue. So I think I've been a part of conversations around climate and population growth, and kind of noodling on that. I don't really have a direct answer. But then something that we've been talking about a lot is what is our own contribution to climate change? I mean, we have people flying all over the world all the time. And so we're exploring different systems of better remote management, so that we don't need to have people flying from, you know, US cities all the time or European cities all the time to go further away. But how can we bring some of those skills closer to where our programs are, so that people aren't always on airplanes, because that actually is a huge part of this. I mean, obviously there are lots of huge parts to it, but airplanes are certainly not the full. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to use more nimble models that are better.
Any other questions?
I'm interested in, some of you touched upon it, but the healthcare system strengthening and resiliency through medical education and building up like local capacity for healthcare workers. And so I'm just interested to know if you've had any experience with programs like that or solutions that have come up to that issue.
At SAVE, we do a lot of capacity development of medical staff. And the reproductive health program I work on does a lot of training around contraception, maternal care, and post-abortion care. And so we've, over the years, it's been about 10 years, seen really great success actually. You know, a lot of places people are quite skilled, they just haven't had training in a long time. And so infusing systems with training and getting people excited about things they have the skills to do but just didn't know how to do has been really great. And we have employed in this particular project, which is about 10 countries, a trainer model, which has been really useful because some of the places that are harder for us to access, like Syria, our trainers who are Egyptian can go quite easily. And so, you know, kind of having that capacity across languages and then across places and having it be easily deployable has been really useful. And also just increasing the number of midwives that are available in a lot of the places we're working. I think good quality midwifery and nursing care has been a very, very good investment in terms of the outcomes we see.
Also, the training of medical professionals to be more sensitive to the different communities that they serve. For example, you can have a very competent doctor who has no clue how to work with adolescent girls, for example. And so one of the big issues in sexual reproductive health is how to provide young people with youth-friendly services with good quality of care that includes service providers that are understanding of the special circumstances of the population that they're serving. So definitely that kind of training is key in order to ensure a good quality of care. And also, the working with community health workers as well, and to create exactly through the training of trainers and in a repetitive manner. It can't be a one-off thing. It needs to be constantly sort of to have reminder trainings and that allow to embed also new learnings and latest research, for example, in what would work best in serving specific communities in terms of health services.
We do a lot with mental health, as introducing mental health care into primary health, so that when people go to clinics, they're being asked about how they feel, and the physicians or the nurses are aware of kind of certain behavioral things that might indicate a problem. So I'm proud of that because it was, it was only within the past 5 years or less that my primary care physician started asking me if I was depressed. So, so we're that far behind. Then, the fact that Uganda, somewhere in the middle of absolute nowhere, is doing that is pretty good, I think. So, so that's really important. But the other thing that we're doing, which I think is also important, is we're also helping to educate, like not necessarily medical, but like we educate police, for example, around what happens if a 7-year-old girl is raped. How a male police officer is going to deal with that because they don't necessarily know how to deal with that. So there's other actors as well that are not necessarily wearing a white coat, but they are important in the chain of things.
And especially to address stigma and discrimination related issues as well, whether it's in the context of HIV or whether it's in the context of mental health, whether it's in the context of any other sensitive matter that service providers in general, even beyond medical, will need to address without bias, to remove the biases associated with certain behaviors, even dealing with drug users.
We can take one last question. So I had a question regarding working with disabled populations in the humanitarian context. I think this is similar to what are some of the problems that you faced when working with triple disadvantaged groups or disabled women as well as facing pain and also on one day? What are some of the needs that such the population faces, and what do you think are some of the ways in which we can help deal with some of the challenges that these kind of disabled and disabled populations face?
Yeah, it's such an emerging area, and I think it's so important. And I've been thinking about it a lot from a data collection perspective. There's a whole team of people at SAFE that are working on how to address the needs of people who are disabled, and like you mentioned, doubly disabled maybe in an emergency. And it can be quite challenging because asking about a disability can feel stigmatizing, and so we're trying to figure out how to know if we're serving people who have disabilities who might need other services, but without necessarily putting them on the spot or making them feel stigmatized because they are disabled. I don't have a lot of massive words of wisdom, just because it is something that we are kind of new to, I'd say in the last 2 years. But I think it is something that our emergency health unit, which I referenced, has been aware of and trying, in cases of disabilities where there might be additional therapeutic care available for the disability at hand, making sure the referral systems are in place so that people can get care. Because in a lot of instances, people have disabilities and there are services available that would make their lives easier, but they've just never been involved in the health system such that they're able to be linked to those services. It's a really good question.
There's also innovative practices that you come across because nonprofits work on disabled populations in the Western world. And what is some of the work that's being done for people who have these kind of issues?
I'm sure that there is a lot of innovative work that is being done, and I would be happy to link to the people at SAFE because I must admit that it's a bit out of my own. I know that people are working on it, but I can give you my card and you can get in touch with me and I can link you with somebody who is better equipped to answer. A lot of our children's health work is where we're seeing those locations.
Just to follow up with the same question, just these people that in that emotion of having a disability, having to face any challenges in working with this kind of issue, working on mental health or any kind of disability, and just how do you think something like this affects intertwined with so many other social issues involved on the issues?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good and important question. It's there's one area where we work directly with disabled populations. So we work actually on the Disabled Children grant. So one of the things that we do on that grant identify disabled children who have either been forced out of school or who have never gone to school because their parents or guardians didn't think they were equipped for school. So we enroll them into school, which is, I think, an important service because that's, it's not medical care, but it's important. So when I look around, I've seen some pretty remarkable things. Like there's a school for the deaf in Uganda, and they transport every week. They transport a busload of about 23 South Sudanese refugees down to Gulu so that they can go to school during the week, and then they bus them back on the weekend so that they can stay with their parents. So there's some exceptional things that are happening. I think my sense though is that on the whole there's a lot that needs to be done. The kind of complex trauma and dual kind of diagnoses and this sort of thing is hard still, I think, even for my staff, because we're looking at maybe 200 trained counselors in all of northern Uganda, which is a big place. And the higher education is good, but it's not great. So some things, we would all still be kind of working on. So unfortunately, it's an area that I think probably deserves a lot more attention in schools as well as in organizations and isn't getting.
Thank you all so much for coming and staying such a long time. Would you please join me in thanking our panelists with a big round of applause?